Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now in this hand, I have the Work Tuff Gear Night Hunter designed by Isaac Thill of Wheels Custom Kydex. But in this hand, I have the Work Tuff Gear Night Hunter designed by Isaac Thill of Wheels Custom Kydex. Now, why do I have two of these? Well, bottom line is, yes, they're the same knife, but there is a fundamental difference. This one here you can see has the standard grind, so your typical Work Tuff grind being that secondary bevel with a convex edge. But here in this hand, well, this one is a full convex grind, no secondary bevel. So thank you to Isaac, who loaned me his personal knives to do this side-by-side comparison to see how each one of these would perform. What are the pros? What are the cons? Which one of these excels in which tasks? Now, at this point, you may notice these are a little bit dirty. I've already done my field work with these and I know the answer. But for you to find out which one is the winner in this test, well, you're just going to have to watch to find out. So with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. Now, before we get too far, I would like to say thank you very much to Isaac Thill, who did provide these for review. Now, first things first, I have to carve myself out a baton. I'm going to do pretty much half of the work with the V-grind knife first, and then half of the work with the full convex grind second. That's going to be pretty much the way all of these tests go today. So first, with the V-grind, my initial impression of this knife is it's surprisingly balanced for how sort of forward heavy it looks like it would be. But let's test it out in some carving. Work Tuff always doing a nice job with their edge. Again, with the V-grind, pretty straightforward and standard. My ability to find this now, when I say V-grind, this still does have a convex edge. It's just not a full convex, really like the other blade, and you'll sort of see the difference. Definitely getting some nice bite. And again, fairly well balanced overall. This is a full flat grind from the bottom all the way to the top with that secondary bevel. Again, that's more like a V-grind, but it's a convex V-grind at that. So I can usually find the edge geometry very well on Work Tuff knives. That's the case here with the Night Hunter. You can hear that bite. Pretty solid chunks coming off of here. Again, I'm only really trying to do the top half of this for now. And then we'll flip this over. This is a larger blade. It's going to fatigue a little bit, and especially without a finger choil. So that's a big, deep blade, just a big chunk of steel here. But overall, doing a nice job. And all I'm really trying to do is thin out this handle so I can do my batoning tasks. Every knife's going to have a little bit of a learning curve, so as I get into this, the thing about the Night Hunter, this big belly, you kind of need to work with it and then just kind of get into it and feel it out. So as I'm slicing, I'm really trying to take advantage of that belly as I get more forward towards the blade and leverage that for the slicing. So you do need to kind of manipulate your wrist just a little bit as you carve. Not a big deal. Again, just a matter of getting used to it. I love that ching, ching. The SK85 high carbon steel, always very well done by Work Tuff. And you can see here, just doing a nice job. So at this point, let's swap it out for the full convex edge. So here, the full convex edge, you can see a little bit different than the V-grind or the secondary bevel. Here you can see the full flat grind coming down into that convex. There is no secondary bevel. That's the primary difference between the two. Now, something else to keep in mind as I start to work here, these are Isaac's personal knives. So these are well used, but at the same time, still a real nice edge. He seems to have just kind of touched up and cleaned up the edge a little bit here. So these aren't reprofiled by any means, so it's the same factory grind angle. And here, as I start to get some impressions, I can tell you this feels really good and carves really nice. This full convex edge is pretty awesome. Both of them doing a nice job. They do feel a little bit different, but at the same time, still easy to find that edge geometry and the grind angle as I do the carving, nice and controlled. And you can see here, just taking some nice healthy chunks. Now again, at this point, a big mass, heavy blade. I am fatiguing just a little bit, and without a finger choil, it does kind of leave it a little more forward weighted, but I am generally happy with how balanced this knife is. And I think that partly comes from the fact that this is a full flat grind versus a saber grind. You do lose a bit of that blade mass by thinning out on the stock. This is a full 1/4 inch thick stock, but by the time it tapers down and into that convex grind, being a full flat grind, you've actually taken a good amount of the mass out of the blade, and that leaves this surprisingly balanced overall. So pretty nice. As you can see here, nice and easy. Just again, slicing up towards that belly. And at this point, that should probably just about do it here. So, got myself my baton. Let's get into some splitting. Not putting too much power behind it, but just enough to set into the wood. You can see already, burying pretty deep. No problem there. Let's put a little more power behind it. There you go. Going right through the wood there with ease. Translating that crack pretty well down the wood. Barely had to try. Right through. So no matter which model you have, this has a nice hook right in the back. Your hand is going to index very well, and it's going to lock up fantastic for those chopping tasks. So here you can see, just as I grip back here, that nice flare and a good long handle, so you have that forward grip with that little bit of an indexing choil there, and then back, plenty of length here for a full grip, where you're kind of indexing right between where that bump comes over on the choil and then the back of that hook. So nice size handle, feels really good, good ergonomics overall, and definitely fits my hands very well, and especially for these chopping tasks. Now versus a saber grind, I can tell you this does not necessarily have that same sort of splitting or wedging action. However, where it does lack a little bit in the wedging action, it picks up in the slicing capabilities, and this is just pushing and gliding right down through the wood. So even though it's not establishing a crack early on, it is doing a nice job translating all the way through the wood without too much binding. So overall, very effective for batoning. So here, just an example of what I'm talking about. Typically with a saber grind, you'll see that it really does start to open up this gap a little bit earlier. So as you're pounding through the wood, it is wedging further down the piece of wood as you go, buying a little bit of room so the knife doesn't bind. And the thing about a flat grind, which here, if you look closely, you can see that there is a lot of friction on the knife really touching the wood entirely, so a little bit different between a flat grind and a saber grind. However, again, my point being, where you lack in overall splitting capability, you do gain in slicing capability. So this is doing still a plenty good job chopping, a plenty good job with these batoning tasks. It's just going to take a little more effort sometimes to get through more stubborn wood, but you're going to gain benefits with this knife in other areas. And you can hear just how hard I am absolutely wailing on this. This piece might be a little too stubborn. Again, not my knife. I really don't want to damage it. But at the same time, it's a work tough knife. And honestly, at this point, this is just quite knotty. This is a real hard piece of maple. Around here, my maple's about as tough as it gets. The oak actually splits a little better because it's more straight grained, but the maple, real twisty. If you look at this grain, it's just real stubborn. So before I go beating too hard on this knife, I might need to think twice whether or not I care to pound this in any deeper. So that was with the V-grind. What about with the full convex edge? Burying nice and deep. Now again, this is a piece of oak. The oak being a little more straight grained, I do not expect to have any problem with the oak around here. Right down and through. And as you can see, as I mentioned, very straight grained. This stuff splits beautifully. Literally just dropping the knife and seeing how it splits. You can see here, translating the crack pretty well down the wood here. Batoning should be very simple. Barely hitting it, and you can see that did all the work I need. Going for something a little more stubborn here. Right down and through, I mean, absolutely wailing on it. And again, you can see just the difference in the quality of the wood. This maple, super twisty, but the knife did it nice. This is that same piece the V-grind struggled to go through. Let's see if we can do it with the convex edge. I think I'm gonna get this to go. Unfortunately, I buried it to the handle. That's gonna bind up, and I don't want to wreck Isaac's handle, so I gotta pound this back out, and let's reset and see if we can get back through this. Now, I'm not sure if you can see that, but this should speak to Work Tuff's heat treat. This knife, at this point, even being a 1/4 inch thick, is completely curved over. As you look down the handle, you can see it's taking on that curve as it fights its way through this wood. So this should spring right back. And well, I'd say it did for sure. Nice job, Work Tuff. Perfect heat treat. Wasn't gonna let that beat the night hunter. So, subtle, Yet I do have to say, I think the full convex edge does do a little bit better in terms of splitting and batoning versus the secondary bevel grind. Now, either way you go, they're still going to have some of the same philosophical properties, just in terms of the fact that they're full flat grind, the overall length, geometry, general splitting capability. But what I think is that early in the chopping or splitting process, you get a little more meat and thickness behind the edge on the full convex, which does help a little bit pushing that crack up ahead of the blade. And it's going to be, again, very subtle, but as I'm looking at some of the smudges and the wear lines, I do feel as though I'm seeing some of that marking a little bit higher up on the blade on the secondary bevel, and that's an indication that to me it's not splitting ahead, and that crack's not translating down ahead of the rest of the full flat grind quite as much as on the full convex edge. But both are very good. All right, so now what about those stabbing tasks? I always like some good stabbing tasks with a nice Bowie clip. Let's give it a shot. First with the V-grind. Now I don't expect this to be different between the two different models, but science will prevail. There you go. Now, as you can see here, fairly large piece and capable of definitely getting down and through this. It can do it. What I can say is it does leave a little bit of a hot spot on the pinky where this is thinning out down the stock. You can see by the time it makes it to the bottom here, that is the thinnest part of the blade down by the grind. And my pinky just wants to ride down right into that little pocket there. So that is fairly thin, and again, not completely uncomfortable yet. If that was just thicker with maybe a little sort of, call it, sharpening choil there, and then the grind really starting a little further out, so you got a full thickness of that guard there, that would really protect your hand. Now I don't feel like I'm gonna slide off terribly, but at the same time, it's just a little uncomfortable. So, in my opinion, that could be a little thicker there for the stabbing tasks. Not a big deal, but, you know, with a blade like this, how much stabbing are you gonna do? Well, personally, for me, when I'm processing for a fire, quite a bit. So, I think just a little thicker all the way down to the bottom there would help push that plunge line just a bit. I mean, it doesn't take much. Maybe a little sharpening choil on there at the end just to kind of allow you to sharpen the blade all the way through. That would aid in comfort on your pinky. So that's just my personal opinion. And so now for the full convex edge. This blade has a nice deep depth to it. This depth here, nice and wide. So when you're doing some of these splitting tasks, and especially stabbing here, you stab through, and when you really start to twist the wood, you get a lot of leverage from the blade as this is twisting, really popping that wood open. So this is very effective. Just a real thick piece here. Slamming down and through, pop. No problem. So these night hunters for stabbing, very effective. Like I mentioned, just that little thing where I'd make that guard a little more comfortable, but for the stabbing tasks, this is awesome. Alright, so now we'll chop some of these down to size a little bit. first the V grind. Taking some real light hacks. There you can see, really pretty much just letting the blade do the work here. Right on that belly. Again, just going to let the weight of the knife do the work. Right on that belly. Slightly thicker piece here. Whoa. And now the convex. Now for a thicker piece here. Last one, again, fairly sizable piece. So not that the pieces of wood were exactly identical, however, I do have to say, I feel like the full convex really shined in that particular test. Worked a little bit better, just did a nice job getting through the wood. So this really an interesting side-by-side comparison to see how these perform. So far, they've been pretty close neck and neck. But at this point, I do have to say, I feel like the full convex edge is pulling away just a little bit. And so they always say the devil's in the details. Well, what about these detailed carving tasks? Gonna get myself some nice healthy chunks here and then lighten up and get some feathers. This here with the V grind. Now, first thing and first impression, as you see, I'm working down the wood. I do end up kind of bumping into my bearing surface. Larger blade, that's going to be the case oftentimes, so you might need to change your posture. And if you do that, you end up kind of getting the butt end of the handle. So just the geometry of the blade is going to be something that you need to play with to get refined carving. But again, definitely capable of doing those tasks. It's going to be a little bit blade heavy, as it does not have that finger choil, but certainly capable of doing the work. Work Tuff gear always having a nice grind angle, and once you find it, you'll see here definitely getting some nice healthy chunks. And again, as I'm working, you can see the forward portion of the blade definitely working its way down onto the working surface, but not a big deal. And at this point, getting some nice healthy chunks. This will help start my fire for sure. Now switching it up for that convex edge, so the fully convex edge here. General blade geometry is going to still come into play, but what about the edge geometry? You can see here, it doesn't bite quite as deep. Sort of gliding a little more at the top of the wood. I am capable of finding some, easy spots to kind of dig into and work my way down. But I do have to say, I think that V grind was a little bit better for carving. You can see I'm having a little bit harder of a time finding that edge geometry. It might just be practice if I take my time and just focus a little more on that edge. Again, as you see, I can definitely get some good healthy chunks, but a little bit easier with that V grind. Now this time, let's go with a little more finesse. I'm going to try to get those finer curls. Running nicely down the spine of this wood. Here with the V grind. Nice and controlled. This knife feels nice and balanced in my hands. It's not a balance issue with the Night Hunter at all. Definitely no balance issues. It's just the forward sweeping blade gets down onto your working surface. So that's just something that you need to contend with a little bit. But a nice refined edge here, definitely capable of getting some dainty curls. The full flat grind giving you a nice grind at the bottom on that secondary bevel. It's going to be good and sharp and fairly thin behind the edge, all things considered, for a larger knife. And so here, as we take a look at this, some nice fine curls on that V grind. Changing it up now to the full convexed. Trying to find an edge. Running the knife nicely down the wood. Really trying to find that angle. Can be done. I think a lot of it for me, quite honestly, is muscle memory, because it is super sharp and very refined. I just tend to be just a little off on my angle of attack. And that's on me more than it is on the knife. So if this was my one tool and I had to get used to it and just practice, I bet you I'd have it down no problem. Still some nice, fine and refined little curls. Again, it's just a matter of me practicing and finding that edge geometry. Now we're getting close to starting our fire. Both of these with a good sharp spine. I don't expect to have any problems. Larger blade, but it has some scallops. Let's see if I can get on this and make some fuzz. Now you can see with this larger blade, it is going to be a little bit awkward getting this sideways in your hands. This sort of lump here, really kind of difficult for me personally in the way I grip this, and it gets me a little close to this back edge of the blade. So what I did find is it's actually easier for me to pull towards me and sort of make this fluff coming up towards me versus pushing down at this angle. So pulling up to me, I mean, look at this. Very, very effective. So this here was on the V grind. And now for the full convex. Now I don't expect to see any difference here. I mean, this pretty much just comes down to how much you've used this spine in the past to do the scraping tasks. Both of them equally sharpened. And assuming that neither one's been rounded out from excessive use, these are going to do the same amount of work. So hogging through this and making some real nice fluff. What about getting to work on some fat wood here, the V grind? No problem getting down and through this fairly quick. Doing a nice job getting me some fat wood processed down. Now the convexed. No problem. And then again, splitting some of this down.
Just some final fluff here on the fat wood, and we'll be ready to go.
So all right guys, there you have it, a look at these Night Hunter models, both the standard V-grind, the secondary bevel with that convex edge, and then the full convex grind. Now, as you saw that footage, very cool. I need to just say this knife is wicked badass. I mean, both models just awesome. There are some great things about these knives that I absolutely love. Couple things that were a little bit difficult for some of the tasks that I was trying to perform, but at the same time, to each their own. These knives are definitely in that chopper class, so where I was trying to do some of the finer work, it actually did it pretty well considering the size of these blades. Now, before I give you my final thoughts, let's flip the camera around. I do want to give you some specifications on here so we can kind of take a look at this in a little bit of detail. Now, the first thing you're going to notice, the size of these knives. They are just gigantic. I mean, as you look at it here, we have basically like 18.5 inches in overall length. As you look at the blade length here, you have roughly 11.75 inches. So these are significant knives. I mean, just super large chopping class knives. Yet, as I mentioned the entire time, just surprisingly balanced and nimble. I actually like the way these feel. They index extremely well. So Isaac did a wonderful job with the actual like knife geometry and the balance, which I am thrilled. And something that I think is just so cool, if you go back to one of the photos that was placed really on Work Tuff's, and I saw it on Instagram, you'll notice this handle as a 3D print was literally, right in line with another knife that I have become near and dear to, my Woodscraft Chanto. Both of these handle designs were kind of like born at the same time. So not that they're exactly the same, but they're the same vintage, the same era in the Work Tuff gear lineup development, which I appreciate. So whether or not, you gravitate towards one of these knives or another, bottom line is they were kind of born around the same time. So you know what? Isaac and I kind of have a little bit of a bond that way, and I appreciate that about this. So I will always remember the Night Hunter as one of the knives that was born in the same era as my Woodscraft Chanto, and I appreciate that. But that's one thing that I think is interesting. Check out this handle. When you look online, every single sort of photo I saw made me think the handle was kind of turquoise. It is on average, but when you look real close, it's really like blue and yellow layered G10, which is pretty neat. So like deep in underneath, you're actually seeing layers of yellow marbled in with the blue. And that's what gives it that average value, like a turquoise color, which is really neat. And on top of that, I'll go as far as saying, this is the most unique handled color that I've seen. And on top of that, certainly in the Work Tuff lineup. So definitely cool, and it stands out from the crowd. Now, as we get into some of the finer details on the specifications, I did want to measure a little bit on the edge thickness right behind the secondary bevel, which I'm not the best at getting right on this, but it's fairly thin. at roughly, I'm going to call it 1.35, 1.36 millimeters. Now I'm going to try to get on roughly the same location here on the convex, so the full convex, and I don't know, I'm doing the best that I can, but I want to say that's maybe closer to about 1.44. Now, I get a little bit sort of, I don't know, I'm a little bit back and forth in my mind about which one of these actually performed better on average, but I do have to give it to the full convex at the end of the day. Now, both of these should be roughly about the same, and the reason why I say that is, yeah, granted, this ends up with a secondary bevel, and then that, you know, it's not really a V grind, but that convex edge there, it's almost the same conceptually as what you do end up getting with the full convex edge, but a little more meat behind the edge. And I think it changes the actual grind angle by a little bit by the time you get down there. I feel like this is a little more broad, where you end up a little more refined, a little bit tighter, maybe a little sharper on the V grind and that full convex there. I'm not positive. I can't say for sure. I'm just going by my feel and what it felt like to work with these tools. However, I do think for a larger blade, especially being that full flat grind, going down into that full convex edge, and the type of work this was able to perform between the relatively good job on the finer tasks on average overall, but the splitting and the batoning, the chopping, I think the heavier duty work, this definitely worked a little bit better. And it's splitting hairs, but at the same time, for a larger blade, I just feel like the full convex was the way to go. And even to the point where, honestly, I do kind of wonder, what would it be like on something like the Chanto? Like, would it actually, I don't even know if you can do that with this shape of a blade, but like, it just has me intrigued by the performance and the general capabilities overall being very good. So could you go with really one of these? Like, if I had to boil it down and say like there was only one version of the Night Hunter available, which one would I choose? I would say I would go with the full convex grind. Either way, you're going to do all right. This is just a beast of a blade, a wonderful performer, extremely well balanced, feels amazing in the hand, nicely done by Isaac Thill, an awesome design, and then teamed up with Work Tuff gear. You really can't go wrong. And so I thought you may be wondering where the Night Hunter stacks up against some of its brothers. Well, first things first, the Night Hunter definitely falling in that full extra large size chopping class. So as you look here up against the same sort of size class, here you have the Puzon Predator Hunter. Here you have Zeke Minacho's proper chopper. And as I line these up right on that butt end, we're going to slide the Night Hunter right into place. Now, as we look at these, and it is very subtle, the Night Hunter here, just a little bit longer. It is the longest knife in the Work Tuff lineup to date, I believe. I don't know if there's any longer than this. Now, there may be slightly longer, I'm not positive, but I would say definitely not in that chopper size class. So I think this is the biggest knife to date Work Tuff has. Anybody feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. However, what about weight? So what I thought I'd do, we'll slide these aside, and we're going to take a look at these in terms of weight. So I got my scale here. First things first, we're going to put the proper chopper because, well, I think that's probably going to be the heaviest of the bunch, but we'll find out. So as we get this onto the scale here, you'll see 2 pounds, 4.1 ounces. The Predator Hunter, 2 pounds, 1.0 ounces. And let's see, where do we end up with the Night Hunter? Oh, 2 pounds, 2.3 ounces. So Puzon Predator Hunter has it beat in terms of being a little bit lighter. I would not have necessarily guessed that by feel. And, you know, both of these are fantastic knives, but it's just that sort of balance that I felt out of the Night Hunter that had me thinking it was going to be just a little bit lighter than its brothers, but definitely neat to see it in comparison. And just finally, to wrap up, a couple of final things. You can't go wrong with the Work Tuff sheath. So each one of these came with a slightly different sheath. This one here is the Work Tuff sheath. You kind of get it in and you sort of pop it up into place. Works just fine. Comes with typical hardware. Nicely form fit. I would definitely not carry this inverted. It is definitely too heavy for that. But at the same time, pretty solid. Like, I have to really kind of work to get this out of the sheath. So, yeah, if I'm like kind of really working at it, it'll come out. But I mean, generally speaking, good quality retention, no problem. It's a little bit of an awkward shape just from the standpoint that you need to kind of feed it up and into the sheath. But generally speaking, very good. And even cooler is, well, don't forget, Isaac is a custom kydex maker. So here, and I know he has played with a bunch of different designs for this. I don't think this is necessarily his final design, but definitely a suitable, nicely made kydex. Here again, taking this version, and as we get it in here, good positive click, so listen to that. And so again, just clicking that into place, very nice. This is like really rock solid. This sheath is very nicely made. Actually, I really like the way it looks with the olive, with the brass, really cool. And on top of it, I noticed that he has this sling, which is awesome. Beach and Tactical sling, one of my favorites. You can see this thing's been to war and back, so he's wearing this well. But good buddy Jacob Peterson of Exodus Knife and Tool, the Prepper's Bunker Outdoors, and Beach and Tactical, who's the man. So definitely a nice rig here. So definitely really, really cool. So I appreciate you guys coming along, checking this out. I hope you enjoyed that. The side-by-side comparison and field use with the Night Hunter, both in the standard grind and also that full convexed. So if you like what you saw, do me a favor, take a look at my Outer Limitless 2 channel, which is more on the tactical and firearms side of things. At this point, that channel is growing quickly. I have a bunch of videos up there, so if you like what you see here on Outer Limitless, do me a favor and check me out on Outer Limitless 2. And finally, to wrap it up, again, thank you very much. I appreciated Isaac for sending these along. I'll clean these up and get them back to you. They are still in perfect condition, just a little more loved, and I am absolutely thrilled to have been able to test these out. So, all right, guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.